Welcome to DABCC Radio,
where smart people listen.
Virtualization and Cloud Talk,
Featuring cutting-edge solutions from the hottest companies around the globe.
broadcasting from the DABCC offices in sunny Sarasota, Florida.
Surrounded by computers, books, and Legos. Your host, Douglas Brown.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another DABCC Radio episode. I'm really looking forward to this. We have Ben Murphy from Lakeside Software today, and Ben, I've known Ben a while, and he's a really great guy, and he has a great wit to him. So I'm really looking forward to this podcast because it's always fun to chat with Ben. Not only is he witty, but he's extremely smart. And so we're going to chat a bit about EUC. We're going to chat about this COVID world, what he's seeing. Of course, bring us up to speed on what's going on over Lakeside Software, WVD, cloud, EUC, the whole gamut, right? So with no further ado, let's just dive into it, shall we? Yeah, I think we shall. So here's my interview with Ben Murphy from Lakeside Software. Okay, Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us. We've never had you on the podcast show, have we?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's right, Doug. I've never been on here before.
That's a shame.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least I finally made it.
Yeah, we used to have Schumacher. Mike would come on, and last Lakeside podcast we did was years ago, and Mike came on. But it's really nice to have you on. So you're a great personality. So I can't wait to hear what the heck you have to say today. So that being said, for those people who might not know who you are, who has been, and what do you do over Lakeside Software?
Well, I appreciate that, Doug. I was going to say, if you wanted to talk to Mike, I could make a phone call right now, and we could just swap that right over.
Mike's great too. Don't get me wrong, but you're just as good. So this will be fun.
Yeah, definitely. So if you can handle being with me for the next 40 minutes, my name is Ben Murphy. I am the Senior Director of Product Management at Lakeside Software. So basically, I do all of the product roadmap, just the general PM activities you'd expect for a software company. Then, yeah, of late, do a lot of hanging around in my home office because there's really not a whole lot else for me to do in the world right now.
Yeah. So you're the product manager, so I can ask you all the good stuff. What's coming next, right? What's on the roadmap?
Well, yeah, it's a great question, and the big thing is we're trying.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that one. We're way ahead of ourselves. I was sort of joking, but I will definitely ask you that. So stay tuned for that question. You can start thinking about it now. How's that sound?
Yeah, I'll prep it in the background. I was just going to start making a whole bunch of lies up, but this gives me time to come up with some actual answers.
Okay. So for those who might not be familiar with Lakeside or maybe know you from years ago, can you sort of level set us and what you guys are doing?
Absolutely. So from kind of the most pure sense, Lakeside Software is dedicated to the idea of understanding how are IT systems and general end-user computing devices working for users. So one of the biggest questions I think that is really much more foundational to IT than I think people have given it credit for in the past is, are we providing the kinds of resources to our end users that they really need to be productive, things that they need for just day-to-day business activities? And, with present circumstances, it's even more difficult, I think, to really understand, have we sent people to remote locations with appropriate desktop, laptops, remote session provisioning, any of the solutions that we use for kind of business continuity. So that's kind of the heart of what we're about, is understanding what it is that users really need on a day-to-day basis. And then there's kind of the boring Gartner terminology stuff. You might want to cut boring out of there. I don't know if anyone from Gartner listens to this.
I think they know it's boring.
Okay, good.
It's great content. Gardner's one of those, to digress a second, we can do this. I can do this because it's my show, but that's one of those things about Gardner or Accenture or any of these, although I guess Accenture isn't but they're boring too, is that they know they're boring, but what they're saying is really great, right?
Yeah,
And if you pay attention, you can learn a heck of a lot from those folks, right? But it is definitely delivered in a very dry way. I'll give it that.
yeah. Well, I think it's just by its very nature, it's kind of dry, right? I mean, I don't know how much you can really spice up the idea of. I mean, ultimately, using Outlook to respond to emails is not like a hilarious and or fun thing. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like it's going to be a dry activity no matter how you slice it.
Yeah.
Um,
Please
so I think
continue.
that's
I was going to say it was boring, or it was boring by nature, right? And that's sort of what you said. But please continue what you were where you were going.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was just going to say it's a digital experience monitoring is kind of the term. So that's the parent's kind of concept, and really it's all around the idea of understanding users, understanding their level of satisfaction, and coming up with mechanisms to score and make things better for them.
Well, perfect. So, it's what's new. So, I know there's a lot new. Maybe you can share some of the really cool things that you guys have released lately.
Okay, good. So I can. This is my actual time to answer that question then.
Well, no,
Just
no,
to
no,
be sure.
no. We're gonna that what I asked you before. That comes later. That's what's coming in the future, right? That's the
Okay.
road. This is what was on the roadmap, but has already been released.
Okay. Good. Okay. So this is me building a bridge into the roadmap.
Correct.
Got it.
Correct.
So things that I think are particularly important and interesting for us lately, as you probably are familiar with, again, the way that things have been going in the world, there's been a really huge focus on the idea of remote work and really the kind of complicated facets of understanding what it means to be productive in this environment versus a more traditional office environment. I think those kind of questions are the most common things that kind of people have in top of mind. So one of the things that we've done as an organization, just in an attempt to try and pull together resources that we have, um, back towards kind of the beginning of, should I just refer to it as the unpleasantness? I'll refer to it as the unpleasantness.
You can do as you
Back at the
please.
beginning, at the beginning of the unpleasantness, we had put together kind of a little offering for remote work analysis, basically a kind of an assessment and planning mechanism to allow us to give potential help to people who wanted to very quickly pivot to work from home. I think a lot of people found themselves in a position where they had not necessarily had the necessity to force their kind of business continuity plans into kind of real action. So I think a lot of people got caught flat-footed. So the introduction of that remote work analysis and assessment plan it was kind of the start of something that we have kind of shifted into, which is a basically an attempt to try to manage that life cycle of remote work. So we've introduced a planning offering. So you can go to it's a good cloud.lakesidesoftware.com. I mean, I can pepper this with CTAs, I think, and the expectation from there then is that we would help guide people through what happens next. So, okay, you come up with a remote work plan. Maybe you were already in the process of moving some people home. Well, now it's time to understand how is that actually working. So as a part of that, we've expanded a number of dashboards, kind of targeted analytical reports, basically content that is designed to help you with the planning phase, then content that's designed to help you understand what's the impact of this change in work location and potentially devices, and then stuff that helps you plan for maybe the eventual migration of people back into the office. So it's kind of the remote work lifecycle And that, I think, is one of the more interesting things that we've done lately. And that's just a world circumstances kind of thing. I mean, it's, we have the data. It's just a question of how do you choose to structure it for kind of each bit of that whole transformation.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Have you seen any interesting data come out of that? Something that maybe surprised you, or requires big changes, or anything of that nature.
Yeah, I would say in the most purely philosophical sense, one of the things that we've seen come out of this is a real question on the nature of what does it mean to be productive, and what does it mean to kind of, quote unquote, work a full day. Um, the big struggle that I think a lot of people have in the kind of old world, pre-unpleasantness, is there's an expectation that you go to the office for some amount of time, and normally that's dictated by office culture. And the expectation or the assumption is that by being in the office, you're kind of productive. Then with this kind of remote work, we've heard from the beginning, a lot of organizations have concerns around, tracking. Oh, well, are my employees actually doing their jobs? So there's concern on the part of kind of upper management or management in general that people are kind of doing that same 9 to 5 activity. My own personal philosophy on that is that it really doesn't matter how many hours you put in. You really need to measure results more than anything. And that's kind of what we have seen for a lot of these customers that come in with this kind of, for lack of a better phrase, want to try to take the big brother approach, and monitor people and make sure, it's like clock in, clock out. We want to make sure you're working 8 hours a day. Well, I think throughout the course of what we have seen and customers that we have worked with, I think IT oftentimes is at a weird crossroads with the business, where the business wants certain metrics to prove productivity. And I think IT usually, anyway, is far more interested in just making sure that devices work and that people are happy enough with what they've got, rather than, making sure that someone's, making 2 beans an hour instead of 1 bean an hour, or whatever it is. So that, I think, puts kind of a natural divide between the motivations for each of those aspects of the business. So where we've seen a lot of success is where people kind of lose the idea of the traditional 9 to 5, and it's okay if someone wants to work in the middle of the night, or if they don't really have like a fixed pattern of activities. In a lot of ways, remote work has enabled us to work in ways that would not have been really possible in the past. And I think that's really a net positive. So, one of the takeaways, and one thing that's kind of surprised me a little bit, is how quickly you see people fall into those more natural working patterns. And I think that's really a positive.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, for me, it's always been work, 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 because it's like, we chatted about this earlier. It's my first favorite thing to do. Why would you make me do my second favorite thing? But it's also been, work, get the job done, right? You have a deadline, and you need to get that. And I don't care if you do it during the day, or hang out with your kids during the day, or go play hockey during the day, and then you work at night. I don't care, right? It's get the job done and do a little bit of extra in the meantime, right? And when you do that, I don't. It doesn't matter. So you guys can actually show that, like, when people are working and when they're not.
We can. I mean, I will say that I pretty much draw a hard line in the sand and say that we collect data that could be used for a variety of purposes. I mean, obviously, there are what I would consider to be more nefarious / poorly motivated use cases than others. But yeah, I mean, we have the ability to show you when people are active, what applications they spend time using. It's one of the foundational aspects of coming up with our view of, let's say, a persona. So, we automatically tell you, for example, the kind of Gartner standard personas of someone who is, highly mobile and maybe a power worker. We use their terminology, but it is customizable. So you can, kind of get a picture of what are people really doing to be productive. And for me, the more important question is, what is it that people need rather than my perception of what it is that they should be doing? Because I think a lot of times you find yourself surprised. And this is a pretty consistent thing. You give users a set of applications and expect them to use them to do whatever it is that you think they're going to do. People are more creative than you might give them credit for, and a lot of times, many of the applications you provision are just not necessary. So if you come at it from the perspective, user A needs to use application B for C hours. A lot of time that definition of productivity doesn't actually match what people really do in the real world. It's just an assumption of how things should be.
Absolutely, absolutely. I totally understand. So you brought up this the uncomfortable. I forget how you phrased it. Let's just call it the pandemic. And
Sure.
so COVID-19. This has definitely taken the world by storm in so many ways, right? But it's messed with work, as you mentioned too. What do you see IT changing? I know at first I hear a lot. Everyone rushed to work from home, and then things sort of settled down. But what are you guys seeing there? And then, do you think things will go back to normal? If so, they go back. What do you think? Well, what do you think happened? What do you think's happening? What do you think will happen?
Yeah. I mean, at this point, with the way 2020 has been going, I could tell you one thing, and the world could just blow up tomorrow. I mean, that's the way that it kind of feels. So
it's a strange year, is it not? I mean, forget about just even the coronavirus. I mean, there's another name for it too. It's just a strange year.
Yeah, I really don't know what to expect at this point. I can tell you that if something even more buck wild than what has already been happening does not happen, then I would say that no, we're probably not looking at a return to normal probably ever. A lot of the research that I have been looking through lately indicates that in the ballpark of 70 to 75% of most organizations are considering permanent changes to at least some portion of the workforce to permanent remote work, which really makes a lot of sense if you think about it. I mean, back 20 years ago, give or take, you started to see an initial wave of a lot of organizations divesting themselves of real estate, realizing that owning the real estate is not really that cost effective, which shifted to rentals for companies like like IBM, for example, used to have massive land investments, and I think it was Pat Gelsinger, not Pat Gelsinger, that's Lou Gertner, that's it, back in the 90s, ended up divesting a bunch of their real estate offerings to try and offset the books a little bit, and they started renting the locations back. Well, I think a lot of places now are realizing, well, why am I even physically in the business of having real estate at all as part of the equation? Because it's just a cost that I don't need. And with that, you have a whole bunch of the kind of consistent operational costs of maintaining a physical location. If you can get rid of that, I think that would be very interesting. And then you can potentially reinvest that back into your employees or provisioning resources for them. So, I think remote work is the future. And, we could talk for days about why I think that's probably better for a lot of people. But, psychologically, I think that will probably result in some necessary changes to collaboration software that we'll probably see happen soonish. But, I think in terms of just the logistics of travel, in terms of operational expenditures for organizations, it's a much more attractive model. Obviously, there are some things you have to be physically present for. I mean, there are some businesses that I don't necessarily see huge changes in day-to-day operations as being possible yet. But I think for most orgs where you can get away with it, remote work is probably going to be phased in as kind of maybe even a preference moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, psychologically, going to work is nice because you see your friends, you build a team. You have a central meaning, beyond just your work, right? It's like, hey, do it for the guys around you, and I think that's important. But I've never worked from an office, so I think, and I've always been a firm believer that you're much more productive from home. And my wife is now working from home, where she's never worked from home. And she's constantly talking about how much work she's doing and how busy she is from other people because they have nothing else to do, right? And because when you work from home, you just sort of don't check out. It's so easy just to, what I call separation between church and state, right? At work, you worked, and when you came home, you did not. And maybe you might had to do a small project or check some email, but when work is home and home is work, then there's not that clear cut boundary, right? So the productivity is out of off the charts. But you lose something in the process too. And this is where you have to be very careful. I wouldn't say I've ever done it right, but like I said earlier, work was my favorite thing to do. So I didn't have any problems with it.
Mhm.
Maybe my
Yeah.
ex-wife would think differently though.
Well, depending on the quality of that relationship, it may be preferable to work regardless. But in your separation of church and state example, does that mean IT is a religion?
Well, for me it is. But no, it's really trying to say that the drasticness of the difference, right? There is such a difference between work, and you really need to separate those in order to have a good work-life balance. And like I said, I don't know if I've ever achieved that. I've always been happy. I love what I do, and I've always loved can't look back and say I would have done much differently. Well, we could all change a bit, but it was a lot of fun. We work in the best industry in the world, right?
Uh, yeah. I mean, I certainly enjoy working in it. I think though that touches on the important part, which is a lot of times it's difficult to really know what makes an individual happy. So a lot of people start talking about what works in the aggregate.
Sure.
So, you're a lot like me. If like I like working, it's fun. I mean, it's good to maintain a sense of really kind of doing something. You're bringing something into being. I mean, like in my case, planning things and things of that sort. Um, but yeah, well, I mean, what works for you doesn't necessarily work for someone else, which is fine. I mean, people, I think a lot of times, especially now, are kind of scrambling to try and find something to hold on to kind of keep themselves at least marginally sane. And
Yeah.
the unpleasantness is what I referred to it as before. The unpleasantness has kind of forced people, I think, to turn within themselves for that to a certain extent.
No, I agree. I agree. So Lakeside's offered various right sizing assessments for years, right? You guys were Windows 10 launch partners, WVD launch partners, which I want to ask you about WVD a little bit in the future and your views on that.
Mhm.
And of course, you're also work with IGEL. Got to bring that up, and you're doing client assessments with IGEL. Have you seen an evolution of how IT picks devices for users, or are we still asking the same question as decades ago?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question. I think some of the questions are at least similar to what people started asking ages ago, because there are some questions that never change, and that's what devices do I have? Who are using those devices? What applications do they have installed? Those are the fundamentals. But I think that in general, much has really changed in terms of what devices are appropriate to people. So, if you rewind to about 10 years ago, that may have been the first year that someone said, hey, it's the year of
Oh,
VDI. I'm
okay.
kidding. But the point is that that was still early days in terms of remote sessions being as, I would say, ubiquitous as they are at this point. Not that they didn't exist, and I would say that obviously Citrix was massive and had been for a while, but it would not be expected for your average person to get, let's say, some flavor of Linux or some less fully featured operating system version as their primary device. That really started to shift around then. I mean, my impression anyway, and this is around when I entered into the industry anyway, about a decade ago, was when we started to see a shift towards VDI, and then every year was the year of VDI, and occasionally it was the year of Linux, but I don't know if that ever actually happened either. And as that started to kind of reach a little bit more of a kind of key part of most of the IT strategy for a lot of organizations, you start to see less and less necessity for having like a real, I guess you could call it a fat OS if you're going to have a thin OS. And that, I think, is a fundamental difference. Now, the real key is the unpleasantness is a forcing function that really will make people reevaluate what it is that they want to send people home with if they're seriously thinking about remote work as a strategy. And one of the things that I think will be very top of mind is now that they have scrambled to pull together, remote resources or sessions of whatever kind, whether it's desktop as a service through Windows Virtual Desktop, or whether it's on premises, or whether it's some other provider, they have now put the effort together to enable remote work. And is there really a necessity for them to have a fully featured OS experience somewhere or applications for productivity somewhere, and then have the same thing on the client device? My point of contention is not really. And I don't know your feeling on the subject, but I know mine is fairly strong. If you send someone home with a Windows device and it's maintained as a Windows device, at some point it is going to stop working. It's just basically a statement of fact. I don't really know. Well, actually, I do kind of know. But anyway, if you leave a Windows device unattended for long enough, it's probably going to blue screen or do something that you don't want it to. And the cost of maintenance on that is significant. So support costs for ongoing support for that full-featured OS, patching, making sure that it's managed appropriately. Well, it was not that pleasant before. I don't think any IT administrator is like skipping into the office to use SCCM to maintain updates. I could be wrong. Again, your mileage might vary on that. But the point of the matter is that it was hard enough to do on premises, but now that everything is distributed and users may or may not even be connected to a corporate network, and you may have some maybe MDM or maybe some kind of management done through a tool like, let's say, Intune or something like that with Azure Active Directory joined devices, there's only so much you can do. And I would contend that there's only so much you would want to do. So, that enters into the question of, well, what should we do? For my money, this is where the Agile OS approach becomes very interesting, because you, as an organization, I'm going to say you, this is the general kind of IT ecosystem for organizations out there. They're going to have a lot of these legacy devices or devices that they no longer really need to use as a fully featured client, which is basically perfect for the use case for Agile OS to repurpose those into a thin client while they think about what their next move is. So even with the existing fleet that they've got, you cut down on the possible footprint for security concerns. You cut down on support costs because you greatly reduce kind of the potential for issues on devices. So it just generally makes sense. So I think that for the foreseeable future, you're probably going to see people hold on to devices that they had prior to the unpleasantness, and probably either repurpose them or use them as more of a dedicated client. And then I think with the next kind of batch of IT procurement for those devices, especially with remote work, you're probably going to see a real push for thin devices or devices that we would consider to be not as fully featured. Not to break your heart, Doug, but I think there's room for like an iOS approach there as well. So you'll probably see maybe some iPads being used, and maybe Chromebooks as well entering into the marketplace.
You bet. It's to me, it's always, the device is always about what it's about use case, right? Everything's about use case, right? But from the agile side, there's a huge benefit there, right? But more importantly, what you said about Windows, and it's not that Windows is a bad operating system, not at all. It's that it's an operating system that does everything for everybody, and it has to be, right? So if you throw that in the hands of an end user, you have to manage that device, and that becomes, or in a home user, excuse me, you have to manage that device, and that becomes very costly and very difficult too, right? And you have to worry about all the things you mentioned and security too. What's nice about something like what iGel brings to market, or the competition too, is that you can lock that down in a much easier fashion. So then it comes down to management, which I guess everything comes down to management, right? What you guys are selling to is management, right? You're able to manage that experience, understand that experience, right? And so if you can, to the devices that can give that user what they need so that they can create their widgets or, their documents or their spreadsheets or whatever they do on a daily basis, that's the right device for that user at that particular time. And we at iGel, we firmly believe that, the iGel OS is a great operating system for that environment for many use cases, right? Not every use case, but many, many use cases. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. For me, don't take my Mac away, right?
Exactly.
I need that. I do have an iPad Pro, a really nice one, brand new one. I love it, but I can't use it. It's still a content consumption device for me. But many people can. My wife can. I have a friend, Henning. He does everything. He has a MacBook. He never boots the thing up. It's crazy. So.
I like my iPad well enough. It is close enough. As we see the IT ecosystem evolve, we start seeing like what I would consider to be very obvious kind of markers for where the market's going. If you take like MacBooks now moving to an ARM-based processor
Sure.
that Apple is taking a direct design over, they're just going to unify the operating systems. They had already said that they had planned on doing it, but I think that to me is an acknowledgement in a lot of ways of iGel in kind of like a weird, ironic way. Maybe not you guys directly, but the concept of a thin operating system. Because to me, one of the advantages of the way that Apple has approached the operating system is taking the kind of security principles and just general, I wouldn't call it bulletproofness, but it's a more robust core experience, I would say, than Windows, of like a Linux BSD kind of experience, and making that part of the kind of normal experience for your average consumer of end user computing devices. I could probably go on forever about like you could make the world's most secure Linux yourself and hand make a kernel and all that stuff, but that would be lost on most people, which is why I think OS X and now with that migration coming up to Mac OS 11, they've maintained a nice balance of usability to security, I would say, and to see them kind of understand that, I think the commercial market in a lot of ways kind of shifts the tastes, but also kind of leads the what you see coming in the enterprise market fairly well. The idea of them taking the approach of maybe removing a little bit of the kind of low-level functionality, or making that less of a focal point for the operating system, but making it easier to use and more secure, I think is a mark that you guys should see as a real positive sign. So, to me, iGel OS is a great example of something that, again, you're reducing an attack footprint, you're reducing the level of complexity of support, you're doing a lot of things that make things easier. And to see the kind of commercial players, for now anyway, kind of understand and appreciate that, to me is at least an interesting sign.
I definitely agree. 100%. 100%. So, you mentioned WVD, and that's sort of taken the world by storm too, right? And the unpleasantness, as you've call it, didn't hurt them, right? Definitely
No.
pushed people in that direction, and rightfully so. How does you guys were launch partners with WV, but how does Lakeside work with WVD?
Sure.
How do you deploy it? I mean, is it in the marketplace, all blah 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 blah? Can you explain that? And then, is this any different than how you work with, let's say, a Citrix or a VMware or an on-prem type of solution?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll actually answer the last question first. So philosophically, we are pretty much agnostic to solution type. So we would work in a similar way across any remote session implementation, whether it's Citrix or VMware, or as we'll talk about, Windows Virtual Desktop, or just general RDS from Microsoft. Um, there are overlapping concepts, but a lot of times there are kind of distinct things that are only present in one or the other. So for what we are focusing on, Windows Virtual Desktop, the key is there's an element of uniqueness, which is the actual kind of core infrastructure stuff that comes as part of the Microsoft provided service. So that's kind of that middle tier of Windows Virtual Desktop, load balancing, and basically everything that happens from the time that the client first reaches out to the surface and then brokers a connection. Sorry, someone is very persistently trying to call me, and it's annoying the heck out of me. The lost my train of thought. Anyway, so the point of that rambling diatribe. Yeah, so with Windows Virtual Desktop, the middle tier is the interesting part. So in terms of how we deploy it, this hopefully answers part of the question of why it's different. We are present in the Azure Marketplace, so we do have a transactable offering that you can go and get today. We also have several free or introductory offers that you can get. So if you go to cloud.lakesidesoftware.com, there's an introductory offer there. But in general, what you would do is create a cloud tenant with us, or under certain scenarios, some kind of an on-premises, maybe Azure hosted or however it is you want to do it for hybrid, but different conversation. And you would deploy our software into the image that you're looking to use for Windows Virtual Desktop. Now, the wrinkle here is that's one part of the puzzle. The other part is what happens on the client side. That's basically another third. And then the final third is what I mentioned, which is the Windows Virtual Desktop infrastructure itself. So the actual service components. I refer to it as kind of the black box, more or less, because you don't really know how the remote desktop sausage, is that what RDS stands for? Anyway, so you don't know how that sausage gets made. And you don't need to, really. You just need to know if something goes wrong. So we get a diagnostic feed out of there that we tie into user sessions and the state of machines. So the key, though, is for that complete end-to-end visibility, it's important to get the client as much as possible. So with IGIL-OS, we, of course, already have that default telemetry built into it. Then you've got the diagnostic layer, which is the layer of stuff that Microsoft really, quote unquote, owns. And then you've got the virtual machine, which once again, you kind of get back into things that IT really needs a direct hand in managing, which would be, any of the things that happen in the image, so tuning, things that necessitate someone coming in and changing what applications are in there, or
So Lakeside's been talking about user experience forever, right? Since almost day one, and you just brought it up. So it sort of makes sense to dive down this path, right? So how important is user experience, to your customers? And do you have any examples of how they've been able to improve productivity with Lakeside?
Absolutely. So I think you've touched on what I consider to be the most important topic. So before we're talking about how collection is really, from a fundamentals kind of perspective, the same across implementation types. That user experience score is one of those things that I point to when I say that we normalize our data across different solution types and platforms and things of that sort. So to me, it is pretty much the most important indicator overall of the way that things are working for your end users. And we do have some good examples. So we have a customer that will remain nameless that had some performance issues when they initially got started with trying to do a pilot of a desktop as a service offering. And they, for whatever reason, did not really go through a very lengthy planning process, but instead decided to onboard actually quite a few people. They had started on the order of thousands, and basically began with what I would call a not well optimized image. So this is a case where the client had been primarily using us for on-premises and a mix of contract workers on the physical side of their estate. So we didn't get brought into this until later, but they ultimately started this project, found out that they were getting a terrible experience, and things were just, you get the usual complaints of, oh, it's slow and, I can't use it, blah, blah, blah. So we got introduced and kind of looked at the underlying reasons for why that is. Well, one of the things that they had noticed is they're using a lot more compute resource than they had originally anticipated, because they had been told to expect, a certain level of baseline consumption for the image, and then this is how many users we anticipate would be able to accommodate for a certain cost. And they were finding that wasn't true. So fast forward to us doing some investigation. User experience score for these devices showed that it was really a compute resource impact that was causing problems. Turns out that what they had done is maintain 6 security apps on this image. And the net result of that, and some kind of negative interactions with some other things they had installed, their CPU idled at 60% consumption on every single virtual machine. And that's just system account context activity. That's just like baseline agents. That's without anybody doing anything. So as you can imagine, that was not good. And ultimately, it was determined that a couple of those really didn't even make any sense if you're doing it from a cloud data center anyway, because a lot of it was for, protection of intellectual property and doing some scanning and things like that, which was not even a part of what these people were doing. So it was inducing massively unnecessary load. But by evaluating what the source was, eliminating the apps, all of a sudden, you take an unusable solution, and very quickly they found themselves in a much better place. So their user experience score, in our parlance, went from about a 73% to, I think they ended up around like a 92 or something like that, which is pretty good.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. I love it. Yeah. Yeah. 92. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. So here's a good question for you. In your opinion, what's the least talked about aspect of EUC these days and deserves more attention?
Well, if you were to ask me that question about a year ago, I would have given you a different answer than I would give you now, because I think previously user experience, and I mean that not in terms of like the mechanical parts of the user experience, but more in just the quality of the experience, is one of those things that was really frequently not thought of as being important. I actually have been involved in some conversations, definitely more so in the past than now, where someone, and again, this is a will remain nameless kind of thing, said, frankly, I don't care how well it works as long as it does, and they don't care that it takes 20 or 30 minutes for someone to log into a device. Well, fair, right? I mean, I don't know. We don't get to dictate what it is that is, good or bad or indifferent for these, for people. But that to me indicates that it was not very important, at least to that individual, that someone have a good day when they, start their desktop or laptop or whatever it is. But I think that we have seen an evolution, and in reality, I think it started a couple of years ago, towards more of an understanding that end user experience is important. And that to me, I think, is not unspoken these days. I think it's pretty commonly talked about, but is still, I think, more important than even it is getting credit for now. I mean, basically, and I know that you've seen this. I mean, you talk about using a Mac OS device, so you're a fellow MacBook person like myself. Um, to be honest with you, it is about the experience of my preference for this style of presentation, but it's also just generally about it working better in kind of a generic sense. So to me, that is something that I think we'll start to see more emphasis on. And what I'm hoping for as well as a corollary to that is user experience oriented design. So, we've had the concept of like human computer interaction and the concept of like user oriented design for a long time in the industry. But, I think with the obvious focus on making sure that people's computers are like mechanically capable of doing what they need to do, which is part of that user experience scoring thing. The other side of that is making those experiences meaningful and more subjectively pleasing, which I think we're going to start seeing some focus on. I mean, my parting thought, if everything works the way that I anticipate that it probably should and maybe could, once you start moving a lot of workloads to cloud providers, I think you start to see a lot of refactoring of those really old legacy kind of custom services and apps that have kind of haunted people forever into more meaningful cloud-oriented service-based kind of solutions. And hopefully you can rethink how you interact with it. I mean, I know that you've probably, here's an example. Like, you use any government website, usability was not top of mind when they've designed it. I'll put it that way.
No.
Yeah. So that's, I think, what we're going to end up with. More focus on usability, more questions of what does this actually add to the user experience? Is the user really, quote unquote, happy, for lack of a better phrase? But I think an emphasis on that is certainly due. And I think still not the most talked about, but probably deserves to be.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think one of the other pieces is the endpoint, right? We've all concentrated, been concerned with the back end pieces, and rightfully so, because we had to build up that piece of software, a stack solution, whatever you want to call it, to provide the great user experience and all the different solutions that go into that, right? And now I think it's time to start worrying about the endpoint too. It never made sense to me. I came from the mainframe world, right? So it never made, or at least I grew up in it. It never made sense that we're, this great thing called Citrix and remoting was being deployed out to Windows devices. I always thought that was strange. I think that's probably one of the reasons I ended up at iGel too. But I think that's hopefully we'll see more attention, not from a pure selfish standpoint, but from a user, end user perspective, right? About doing their job. End users don't care about technology; they care about their job, and then they want to go home or leave their room in the corner.
Yeah, I was going to say these days, unfortunately, it's not a lot of going anywhere, but
go to the other side of the house or the flat or something. Yeah.
Yeah, take a scenic tour of the basement.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm very happy to say that you guys, Lakeside is in, my job at iGel is I run the iGel community, and one of the things we've done within the community is open it up to our ISV partners, right? Because iGel, as we always say at iGel, the secret sauce is sort of all these integrations we have within the product. An operating system is sort of, boring without, connections or without solutions added to it, things like Citrix, Microsoft, VMware, but also great companies like Lakeside, right? That's able to monitor the user experience. So you guys have been, inside the community, we wanted to add our partners to that so that our members could learn about the different solutions. And if they're a customer of a particular company, they can join them, follow them, stay up to date with them, ask them questions, things that we do inside the community. So you guys were one of our launch partners for ISV integration, and what do you expect to get out of that? Why did you join? What are you looking forward to? Do you have any feedback from me? Reasons why someone would want to join the community or an existing member to follow you, things of that nature.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, let me just right off the bat point out that my own selfish interest is just purely for swag. which I assume I'll be getting some of at some point. Um,
Well, I'll send you some stickers.
no, I think it offers us a great opportunity, and I think we're very happy to be offered the chance to participate in the community because, for one thing, it's very refreshing and interesting to be able to directly interact with people who are, down in the kind of day-to-day of working with our partner solutions and working with customers to implement kind of that better user experience and in general kind of better managed fleet for remote work or whatever scenario they want. So I think that's very validating for us. And I think in the general case, it's very good to discuss as often as possible what it is that people are really looking for out of the solutions that they're exploring in the marketplace. So what are the things that people are actively experiencing issues with? It helps us shape our direction for what would we want to do to expand the functionality of kind of our native integration that we've got right now. So I think the Agile OS integration that we have presently is great. So, we use a virtual channel, pass through details to our agent without a license cost. But there's always more that we might have the ability to do. So, Ron on your side put together a very nice post on, expanding, for example, the data collection that you can do on a Agile OS device through the use of our fully featured Linux agent. So to me, I find that very validating and finding people out there who are interested in working with, discussing, and expanding what it is that we can do is just a very pleasant prospect. So the more opportunities we get to do that, and kind of the wider the net is that we get to cast to do that as well, the better it is, I think, for everybody. So I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to working with the Agile crew.
Absolutely.
Just make sure you send me a bunch of hedgehogs.
Hedgehogs? You don't have hedgehogs? I have so many of these little critters. It's incredible. So, and I don't want them all, to be honest with you. Everywhere where you look, there's a hedgehog. But I would say you used to get them like candy at a show, but we don't go to shows anymore. So
that's a problem. That's a problem.
Yeah, somewhere there's a warehouse full of these things multiplying themselves, I think. So
yeah, it's a tribble situation.
Yeah, exactly. So that being said, last thing. Well, I'll end with last two. With one, the last two questions is one. We've
Sure.
chatted a long time already. You mentioned earlier in a sort of, that you're the PM. So what's coming in the future, and at the same time, if somebody wants to learn more, what do they need to do?
I finally get to answer this question. This harkens all the way back to the beginning part of the conversation.
It's full circle, baby. Full circle.
Full circle. Time is a flat circle. So what can we look forward to in the future? I would say that one of the things that I have been very interested in as we think about kind of the overall trajectory of the market is how can we cast as wide a net as possible in terms of end user computing devices we can collect data from. So to that end, you'll see ecosystem expansion. At this point, we actually do have deployable agents for Windows, Linux, Mac OS, Chrome OS, Android, and then there's some TBD around iOS. So we're trying to corner the market, if you know what I mean, in terms of being ubiquitous and collecting data. And the other part of it is an expansion of ISV ecosystem partnerships to make sure we're collecting meaningful data that you would not be able to pull directly off of the device. So that would be some centralized data like hitting some of the Citrix APIs. We're also looking to expand our ecosystem of integration partners for AHV and Nutanix. So the introduction of added collection details for feature parity with what we've got with like a vCenter, just as an example. So that's the kind of thing that we're looking to add, at least in terms of a data collection. And then in terms of the overall product roadmap, we will be revisiting a lot. So this is kind of a time of transition for us, as you might imagine. And the major focus for us is going to be revisiting some elements of usability. So that focus is mostly on refactoring user interface items, workflows, things of that sort. So some of the feature sets, you may not see a wild change in terms of what it does, but you may see a big change in how it does it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. Well, cool. That sounds very exciting. I love it. I love it. So if somebody wants to learn more, what do they need to do?
So to learn more, you can go to lakesidesoftware.com. If you would like to get an example of our free remote work offer, you can go to cloud.lakesidesoftware.com. Or if you'd like, you can follow us at Lakeside Soft, or you can follow me at the Ben Murphy, both those on Twitter, for occasional updates.
Yeah, or if you're an Agile community member, definitely check out Pound Lakeside. So the hashtag Lakeside. And if you're not an Agile community member, join us, darn it. So join.agilecommunity.com, right? And then follow Lakeside at hashtag Lakeside. So Ben, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. I met you right when you started Lakeside, I think. It was like 2011 in Barcelona, remember?
Yep. That would be it, and I do remember it well. That was the same trip where some acquaintances of ours from later that night, in fact, ended up getting pickpocketed. I remember that well.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah. Luckily, that wasn't me, but
yes.
I remember your crazy dance moves. You're a good dance mover.
Absolutely, yeah. There was a lot of me to move around on the dance floor then, and every inch of it was jiggling, as they say.
I love it. Okay, buddy. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us, and I look forward to having you back on the show in the future. You're fun to chat with, so it's always. I can't believe we didn't do this earlier.
Perfect. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. Okay, that concludes another successful episode of DABCC Radio. As always, I want to thank my guest for today, Ben from Lakeside Software. True pleasure to chat with him. Really is. So thanks so much, Ben, for taking the time to do this. And, of course, thanks to each and every one of you guys for listening. Definitely check out what Lakeside is doing. It's really neat technology, and I think you guys will like it. So definitely check it out. And what else do I say? But thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please tell a friend. And if you did not, please tell me, right? You guys know the routine. As I say, I basically can copy and paste the closing minus the name. And, of course, the ramble. That's the fun part, I guess. But what else do I say? I hope you guys are all well. It's July now, and my mother used to always say, me being American, we celebrate the 4th of July, as most people know, and she said, once 4th of July comes, the year's over. It just flies by. Well, that's cool with me. 2020 has been a strange year, has it not? So let's get this thing over, and let's get it in the books. Let's get back to seeing each other. So please stay safe. Stay indoors. Stay away from folks. Unless you need to, definitely go see some friends and what have you. But there's no reason to go and to make this year longer, so to speak. And that's my rant for today. I'm not crazy about this stuff, but I'm definitely trying to keep to myself and to my close group of my family, my wife, basically. And I'm a nerd. I bet most of you guys out there listening, guys and gals, right? I'm more than happy to stay home, right? It really doesn't bother me, to be honest with you. I get unlimited time to sit in front of my computer. Not unlimited, but more time than usual. I'm not being forced to go do things I don't want to do. Go out and see people I don't want to see, things of that nature. Although I do really, really, really miss traveling. And it's sort of interesting. I traveled for a lot in my early years of doing tech work and Citrix days and early DABCC days. And then I sort of quit the band and stayed home with the kids and enjoyed life. And I sort of got bored after a while staying home. And I'd travel, but not a lot. And then one day I decided, not one day, but over a period of time, I thought, it'd be nice to get a job again and start working for a regular company instead of myself. And then Agile came around, and what a joy that's been. But I started hitting the road again, and then I realized, this is why I quit the road. But it's a lot of fun, and I do miss it dearly. So it's one of those love-hate relationships. But the best part is, of course, I get to go around and I see all you folks, right? And I get to meet new ones, and that's my favorite part, is meeting the new. Well, I won't say it's my favorite because I love all my friends and all the people I've met over the past 20-some years. But meeting the new guys is so much fun, especially younger kids. And I use that word kids sort of loosely. I call most people a kid as long as they're younger than me, which isn't. I'm 49 now. I don't know how that happened, but I've officially started to ramble a long time. But heck, I can do this. It's my show. This is my part of the interview, right? So I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you doing well. Have a great July. Let's get this 2020 over with. And please, until next time. In fact, next podcast is really going to be fun. I won't tell you who, but I already recorded it, and I'm just posting this one, and then we'll wait a few days and post that one. And it's a lot of fun. He's a great guy, one of my favorites. So it's an interview with just a person, not a person from a software company, and it's sort of an industry guy, an influencer, one of the old CTPs, one of my old friends from the old days, and still very active today he is, and I can't wait to release this. I had so much fun. I can't wait to listen to it again, to be honest with you. So with no further ado, we'll go ahead and call this an episode, and thank you very much for listening to DABCC Radio. Yippee!
CC?
DABC.
Say it again. DABCC.
DABC.
Can you say it again? DABCC.
DABC.
How about DABCC?
DABC.
DABCC.
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 DABCC.